What if the walls around us aren't just standing silently, but recording our every moment? Our emotions, our grief, even our happiness. Stone tape theory suggests that hauntings aren't wandering spirits at all, but memories burned into the world around us. And if that's true, it changes everything we know about ghosts, turning them into something even more disturbing. And there's an even darker possibility. What if the past doesn't just linger in these places? It waits. And when we step into the right place at the right time, something in us triggers it. Welcome back to What If We're Wrong? The stone tape theory suggests that buildings, stones, and even whole landscapes can soak up trauma like a recording device. That what people call a ghost might not be a wandering spirit at all, but an old memory, replaying over and over again. In this episode, we're going to trace where the theory came from, explore some of the most chilling examples, from American mansions to English battlefields and Scottish castles, and find out whether science can explain what so many people believe they've seen. And we'll end with a concept so chilling it could change everything we think we know about ghosts. Because the real trigger might not be in the stones at all. It might be us. You might expect us to begin with a crumbling castle or a windswept battlefield. But our first stop is in Washington, D.C., the Octagon House. Built in 1801, it was once the grandest private residence in the capital, hosting presidents, generals, and scandals. But ask the staff and visitors who've stayed late, and they'll tell you the house has other residents. One night in the 1870s, a servant swore he heard heavy boots on the staircase. He rushed out, lantern in hand, only to find the stairwell empty. But the sound kept coming, step after step, until it stopped just in front of him. In the 20th century, staff repeatedly reported the servant call bells clanging in the night, bells that had been disconnected for decades. When they ran to check the panels, the wires were dead, but the brass bells were swinging as if someone had just yanked the cord. Others have spoken of a young woman's screams echoing from the upper floors, tied to the legend of a daughter who fell to her death in an argument with her father. Whether or not that story is true, the screams are reported still. If the stone tape theory holds, then the Octagon isn't haunted by spirits returning from the grave. It's a house replaying its own tragedies, broadcasting them in sound and shadow to anyone unlucky enough to be listening. The Victorians were obsessed with new ways of capturing and replaying the world. Sound recording, photography, electricity. Charles Babbage, the mathematician behind the first computer, once speculated that every word ever spoken might still linger in the air around us. Henry Sidgwick and Edmund Gurney of the Society for Psychical Research asked whether places themselves could hold on to intense emotion, imprinting it somehow into their fabric. In their age, when magnets moved needles and phonographs could trap voices in wax, the idea that stone might carry memory didn't seem impossible. And so the Victorians laid the groundwork by trying to treat apparitions scientifically, but the idea didn't stop there. In the 20th century, speculative parapsychologists like T.C. Lethbridge began to wonder whether inanimate things could hold a kind of resonance or echo of past events. He didn't use the phrase stone tape, but his work planted seeds that others built on. And then the phrase itself took hold. In 1972, Nigel Neal's BBC drama The Stone Tape imagined scientists discovering that the walls of an old house were literally replaying a tragedy. The broadcast gave the theory its memorable name and fixed it in the popular imagination. From that point, the stone tape theory became a lens through which many ghost stories were retold, and nowhere more famously than at Borley Rectory. Borley Rectory stood in Essex from 1862 until it burned down in 1939, but in its short life it gained a reputation as the most haunted house in England. Built on the site of an old monastery, the legend began with stories of a ghostly nun seen walking along what locals called the Nun's Walk. Dozens of witnesses over the decades described the same apparition, a veiled figure gliding silently across the garden, always following the same path, always vanishing at the same point. She never looked up, never spoke, just replayed the same walk as though caught in a loop. Inside the rectory, the activity was just as unnerving. Residents reported footsteps pacing the corridors at night, bells ringing after their wires had been cut, and whispered voices in empty rooms. Harry Price, the psychic researcher, conducted long investigations there in the 1920s and 30s. He and his team documented objects being hurled across the kitchen, glass smashing in empty rooms, and phantom writing scrawled across the walls. But again, the pattern was repetition. Same footsteps, same sounds, same figures in the garden. And when the rectory was destroyed by fire in 1939, even during the blaze, locals claimed to see a nun's face staring from an upper window. Whether or not every claim was genuine, the sheer number of consistent reports over decades made Borley a textbook example of the stone tape theory. Not spirits returning from the dead, but a house endlessly replaying itself, like a needle stuck in the groove of a record. On Christmas Eve, 1642, weeks after the first battle of the English Civil War, villagers near Edge Hill said the fighting returned, not in memory, but in the sky. They described lines of phantom soldiers clashing above the fields, muskets cracking, drums rolling, horses charging into the mist. Some swore they watched men fall from the sky, only for the entire scene to repeat again the next night. The account spread so far that King Charles I dispatched royal commissioners. Their written report still survives. They too claim to see spectral armies locked in combat. Edge Hill was no isolated ghost tale. It was dozens of witnesses describing history reenacted as though the battlefield refused to fall silent. If England has its battlefield echoes, Scotland has its castles, and few are more steeped in ghost stories than Glamis. Glamis Castle in Angus, Scotland, has stood since the 14th century. It's famous as the setting Shakespeare chose for Macbeth. But within its stone walls, stories of the Grey Lady go back centuries. Visitors to the castle chapel, a small, dim-lit room still in use, often report her presence. Witnesses describe a veiled woman kneeling silently in prayer or pacing slowly across the same patch of floor, never looking up, never acknowledging anyone. She fades only to be seen again by others, performing the same actions as if caught in a loop. The figure is widely believed to be Lady Janet Douglas, accused of witchcraft and burned at the stake in 1537. She was convicted on charges many historians now believe were fabricated. Whether or not the identification is correct, the sightings share the same unchanging pattern. The Grey Lady doesn't interact, doesn't speak, she repeats. Glamis doesn't offer conversation with the dead. It offers a centuries-old memory pressed into its stone, playing endlessly for those who stumble into it. But not all hauntings belong to lords and castles. Some echo from simpler, rougher places, like an old Highland inn where weary travellers still meet a ghostly guest. Northwest of Loch Lomond, the Drovers Inn has welcomed travellers since 1705. Built as a resting place for cattle drovers moving their herds through the Highlands, it's now one of Scotland's oldest licensed inns, and one of its most haunted. Guests staying in its upper rooms often report waking in the night to find a young girl standing silently at the foot of the bed. She wears old-fashioned clothes, stares without a word, and vanishes after a few moments. Staff say that the stories are so consistent they can predict which room is being described before the guest finishes their account. The story attached to her is grim. Local law says she drowned in the river nearby, and her body was carried to the inn in hopes she could be revived. The attempt failed, and her presence has been reported ever since. But those who see her don't describe a spirit reaching out. They describe the same eerie scene repeating itself in the same room. Like the Grey Lady of Glamis, the girl at the Drovers doesn't respond, doesn't move. She simply reappears as though the inn itself insists on replaying her final chapter. At this point, you might be wondering if these sound more like time slips than hauntings. And it's worth drawing a clear line between the two. A time slip feels immersive. Witnesses described entire scenes that seem alive. Like the famous case at Versailles in 1901, where the two women claimed to wander into the 18th century gardens and saw people moving, speaking, and even reacting around them. It felt like they'd crossed into another age. Stone tape phenomena are colder and flatter. They don't interact, they don't notice you. They repeat the same fragment over and over: footsteps in a corridor, a figure pacing, a battle reenacting itself in the distance. The Roman soldiers of York might just be a good example. They're seen marching again and again along that same buried road, never looking up, never changing their routine. It's less like entering the past and more like watching a recording stuck on loop. And that's the crucial difference. A time slip feels like crossing over. The stone tape theory suggests that it feels like being shown a playback, the past repeating but never responding. So if these aren't time slips and they're not conscious ghosts, then what are they? This is where science and the paranormal start to blur. The explanations offered might be unconventional, but some are really compelling. So let's break these explanations down one at a time and see what really holds up. Some supporters of the stone tape theory suggest that old buildings can quite literally hold on to memories. The idea is that porous stone or ancient timber might somehow absorb emotional energy or even record sounds and images. Now, it's a romantic idea, and believers often compare it to magnetic tape. In the 1930s, engineers like Fritz Flömer showed how sound could be stored on reels coated with iron oxide, magnetic particles aligning in patterns that could later be replayed. The leap, of course, is that stone has no such mechanism. There's no physical process by which granite or sandstone could encode a scream the way a tape encodes a guitar solo, except for maybe quartz. Now, quartz crystals are everywhere. They make up a huge part of granite, sandstone, and other common building stones, exactly the materials used in old castles and churches. In technology, quartz is famous for its precision. Quartz watches keep time because crystals vibrate at stable frequencies when stimulated. Early crystal radios in the 1900s could even pull voices out of the air with nothing more than a sliver of quartz, a wire, and headphones. No batteries required. It's this connection that some supporters of the stone tape theory lean on. If quartz inside stone can resonate and transmit energy, could it also act as a kind of natural recording medium? The idea is elegant, but the physics is less generous. Crystals can vibrate, yes, but there's no evidence they can store and replay complex information like voices or images. Unlike a radio tuned to a broadcast, there's no hidden signal waiting inside a ruined wall. This leads to another possibility. Perhaps the recording isn't in the walls at all. Perhaps it's in us. Psychologists have long studied how the brain makes sense of incomplete or ambiguous signals. The phenomenon of pareidolia, seeing faces in clouds or hearing words in static, was described as far back as the 19th century by German psychiatrist Karl Ludwig Karlbaum. In ghost research, psychologist Chris French at Goldsmiths, University of London, has argued that many hauntings can be explained as our brains imposing meaning on noise, shadows, or random sensations. Add in memory quirks like déjà vu or temporal lobe seizures, described by neuroscientist Michael Persinger, which can produce vivid visions and a sensed presence, and suddenly the haunting might be less about ghosts and more about the fragile machinery of perception. Still, if our minds can misinterpret signals, could the environment itself be creating the conditions that cause those misfires? In the late 1990s, researcher Vic Tandy noticed that people working in laboratories with low-frequency sound, infrasound, often felt uneasy or even saw shadowy figures. His 1998 paper in the Journal of Society for Psychical Research, linking a vibrating fan to frequencies around 19 Hz, which can resonate with the human eyeball, creating visual distortions. Damp castles, stone churches, and old manor houses, exactly the kind of places where hauntings are reported, are also prone to drafts, shifting temperatures, and seismic microtremors. Environmental psychologists like Richard Wiseman have tested these conditions, showing that people in haunted spaces often report ghostly sensations precisely where airflow and temperature changes are strongest. And here lies the sticking point. No laboratory has ever managed to extract a ghostly recording from stone walls. Energy dissipates over time, vibrations fade, heat disperses, magnetic alignments break down. In controlled experiments, the theory fails to deliver. Paranormal researchers like Terence Hines and skeptical investigators such as Joe Nickell have argued that the appeal of the stone tape theory is more cultural than scientific. But still, the experiences remain. People continue to report vivid, sometimes life-changing encounters that feel as though they've been imprinted on a place. Do places remember what people forgot? And if they do, what does that make us? Witnesses or triggers? That's something to think about the next time you find yourself alone in an old, silent building. So what do you think? If you've got a story that fits the stone tape theory, I'd love to hear it in the comments. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like my recent video on the tattered man of Gettysburg or the Roman soldiers still marching through York. I've included links in the description below. I'll see you next time.